everyone. My name is Elizabeth Manns, and I'd like to welcome you to the April 4th Coalition Show. This is the January 9th, 2023 edition of the show, and it has been 436 weeks since the closing of the North Adams Regional Hospital. The April 4th Coalition's mission statement is, we are for workers' rights and collective bargaining rights and are against tax breaks for the rich and corporations who ship our jobs overseas. We support all the articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but as is our custom at the beginning of the show, we put the emphasis on Article 23. And Dick, which ones would you like?
I'll do the first two.
Okay.
Right? Article 23. Everyone has the right to work, the free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and protection against unemployment. Number 2, everyone, without any discrimination, has the right to equal pay for equal work.
Number 3, everyone who works has the right to just and favorable remuneration, ensuring for himself or herself and his or her family an existence worthy of human dignity and supplemented, if necessary, by other means of social protection. Number 4, everyone who works has the right to form and join trade unions for protection of her or his interests. And as is traditional, we give a shout out to Michael Putnam, who we believe is still the program director for the community radio station WMNB-LP 107.1, who airs the audio portion of our shows on Fridays at 6 p.m. So, and also a big thank you to our producer, David Fabiano, who comes in whenever we need him to tape shows help us tape shows.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're now into 2023, Dick.
Yes, I don't know about you, but I stayed up till like 2 in the morning on Friday night because
Yes.
I wanted to watch the House of
Represent-
Representatives.
That was quite a show, yes.
Yeah,
that was being put on.
And what I haven't heard a commentator say, and I want to say it at least here, that Kevin McCarthy was saved by the Democrats.
He was.
After he got beat on the 14th round, he had his minion go up and ask that they adjourn until Monday morning at noon.
Correct.
And all the Republicans voted yay, and all the Democrats voted nay, but very loudly. So, if the Democrats just didn't say anything, they would have just went home.
Because he couldn't have flipped the majority vote back to enough to get.
Well, he didn't have enough. He didn't have the.
Right, he didn't have enough votes.
He
to
was one
make it.
vote shy.
No, I understood that. No, what I mean is he couldn't flip the vote for adjournment. He didn't have enough people he couldn't have flipped all of the Republicans back to an aye in order to prevent that adjournment.
No. What he did was they requested the vote by electronic device. So they added 15 minutes to do that. And it was very close. 4 Republicans voted with the Democrats to say no to adjournment.
Right.
And so it looked like the Republicans were going to win by 1 vote. But to adjourn. But all of a sudden, a deal was made, and all of a sudden, Kevin McCarthy went running up to the table, changed his vote, and a bunch of other people changed their vote, and let the
15th vote happened.
Yeah, let them stay in session. And if the Democrats hadn't said no, you're not going anywhere, which I think was a stupid idea. I mean, when you have people that are 80 years old up at 11:30 at night, all you need to get 1 more vote, or to get 3 to go home, just keep it open until 3 go home, and he would have passed. Well, I listened to Hakeem Jeffries' speech, and that was a wonderful speech. It's 15 minutes. I'm sure we're going to show it to you later on, maybe next week or something. But anyways, right now, tonight, we have, we're going to show some videos by Robert Reich. And he came out with 3 videos in the past couple of weeks, and I thought we'd show them. The first one that we're going to show is just a minute long. It's on worker power is on the rise, and it sort of gives us a view of 2022 and what's happened in the worker movement.
Can we we talk about the massive labor uprising that was 2022? Union election victories skyrocketed, as did public support for organized labor. Workers took on major corporations, unionizing for the first time at Amazon, Apple, Chipotle, and Trader Joe's. Starbucks baristas continue to organize at record speed, despite facing unprecedented union busting. The largest private sector nurse strike in U.S. history took place in Minnesota, with 15,000 nurses winning raises and more control over staffing decisions. Academic workers from coast to coast also joined the picket line, with the biggest strike to ever hit American higher education happening at the University of California. In all, over 200,000 workers went on strike this year across numerous industries, as corporations raked in record profits and CEO pay skyrocketed. Of course, striking is just the start of fighting the stranglehold that corporate America has over our economy and government. But let these worker victories inspire you to keep up the fight in 2023. Solidarity.
Yes, solidarity.
Solidarity, definitely.
And just here in North Adams, you
Yep.
know, in North Berkshire, you know, we find that the Mass MoCA union
Unionized, yep.
unionized and has a contract.
They did indeed. They finally won that fight.
And the visiting nurses, they're organizing.
They're organizing, yes, they are.
And so there's been
And
a
before long, I believe the per diem health care, you know, the at-home aides are also working on unionizing as well,
right.
so that they can stop being, they can have some benefits along with the
Right.
per diem pay.
Yeah, so
Yep.
hopefully, you know, we can stem the tide, but it's quite a fight back, because even though these unions are getting organized and getting contracts, there's still a lot of work to be done.
Done.
And the best way to achieve a victory is through knowledge. And Robert Reich in this next video gives us a little knowledge of how much corporate power has been accumulated and how it was accumulated, and where our battles have to be to try to make headway.
Yep.
So let's look at the other one, how the corporate takeover of the American political system.
The corporate takeover of American politics started with a man and a memo you probably never heard of. In 1971, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce asked Lewis Powell, a corporate attorney who'd go on to become a Supreme Court justice, to draft a memo on the state of the country. Powell's memo argued that the American economic system was under broad attack from consumer, labor, and environmental groups. In reality, these groups were doing nothing more than enforcing the implicit social contract that had emerged at the end of the Second World War. They wanted to ensure corporations were responsive to all their stakeholders, workers, consumers, and the environment, not just their shareholders. Powell and the Chamber saw it differently. In his memo, Powell urged businesses to mobilize for political combat and stressed that the critical ingredients for success were joint organizing and funding. The Chamber distributed the memo to leading CEOs in large businesses and trade associations, hoping to persuade them that big business could dominate American politics in ways not seen since the Gilded Age. And it worked. The Chamber's call for a business crusade birthed a new corporate political industry practically overnight. Tens of thousands of corporate lobbyists and political operatives descended on Washington and state capitals across the country. I should know. I saw it happen with my own eyes. I worked at the Federal Trade Commission. Jimmy Carter had appointed consumer advocates to battle big corporations that for years had been diluting or injuring consumers. Yet almost everything we initiated at the FTC was met by unexpectedly fierce political resistance from Congress. At one point, when we began examining advertising directed at children, Congress stopped funding the agency altogether. I was dumbfounded. What had happened? In 3 words, the Powell Memo. Lobbyists and their allies in Congress, and eventually the Reagan administration, worked to defang agencies like the FTC and to staff them with officials who would overlook corporate misbehavior. Their influence led the FTC to stop seriously enforcing antitrust laws, among other things, allowing massive corporations to merge and concentrate their power even further. Washington was transformed from a sleepy government town into a glittering center of corporate America, replete with elegant office buildings, fancy restaurants, and 5-star hotels. Meanwhile, Justice Lewis Powell used the court to chip away at restrictions on corporate power in politics. His opinions in the 1970s and 80s laid the foundation for corporations to claim free speech rights in the form of financial contributions to political campaigns. Put another way, without Lewis Powell, there'd probably be no Citizens United, the case that threw out limits on corporate campaign spending as a violation of the free speech of corporations. These actions have transformed our political system. Corporate money supports platoons of lawyers, often outgunning any state or federal attorneys who dare stand in their way. Lobbying has become a $3.7 billion industry. Corporations regularly outspend labor unions and public interest groups during election years, and too many politicians in Washington represent the interests of corporations, not their constituents. As a result, corporate taxes have been cut, loopholes widened, and regulations gutted. Corporate consolidation has also given companies unprecedented market power, allowing them to raise prices on everything from baby formula to gasoline. Their profits have jumped into the stratosphere, the highest in 70 years. But despite the success of the Powell memo, big business has not yet won. The people are beginning to fight back. First, antitrust is making a comeback. Both at the Federal Trade Commission and the Justice Department, we're seeing a new willingness to take on corporate power. Second, working people are standing up. Across the country, workers are unionizing at a faster rate than we've seen in decades, including at some of the biggest corporations in the world, and they're winning. Third, campaign finance reform is within reach. Millions of Americans are intent on limiting corporate money in politics, and politicians are starting to listen. All of these tell me that now is our best opportunity in decades to take on corporate power at the ballot box, in the workplace, and in Washington. Let's get it done.
No.
Well, just watch the Republicans in the House as they try to limit the financing of the IRS, who have just gotten an uptake in order to be able to keep an eye on corporate, to do much better auditing on the 1% and the point,
Yeah.
and the 0.5% of the 1%
Right.
who have those corporate things, because that's the one thing that came out of all that effort to get Trump's taxes, was that the IRS doesn't have the manpower that they
Right.
need. Shocking, to do the audits.
Well, one
for these
article that
things.
I read in the Washington Post, they had some photographs. They said if you want to know why the IRS needs better funding, go to their cafeteria. And you go into the cafeteria, and all the tables they're all filled with files. They have files.
Files.
They-
Right, there's no place
It's a
to put
mess.
them.
There's no, they haven't updated their computer systems.
Mm-hmm.
It's really a mess, and it's just to prevent people from being audited who are cheating on their taxes,
it.
just like our former executive.
Yes, and the thing,
but-
and
yeah.
and the key points he was making for us in this video about where to fight was to continue to believe and to unionize, so that, because you're more powerful in a group than you are one at a time, I think was roughly where he was going. To keep the pressure on the politicians, because these next 2 years, it's going to be hard to have faith, because not much is going to happen.
Well, you don't know. Michael Moore is
Might surprise me, yes.
is saying that we should be optimistic, because he said this about a month ago. He said it's just, we're just talking about a 5-person
Jim
swing.
string, right.
And he says people don't make it. Congressmen die. He said, we've already had one die. He was a Democrat. He
Correct.
never even took office. He says, people die, they resign, they get better jobs, they get investigated.
They
And all it would be is 5 of them to turn the other way, and it could be a Democratic House of Representatives.
It could be.
And there could be some that are indicted if they're found out to have
True.
participated in January 6th.
Right, that's the whole reason.
There were a
they're
number of
trying-
them that asked for pardons for some reason.
Right, and that's another reason that they're looking to investigate the
Yeah.
investigators.
So
It's
keep your optimism up. But if you want to
Keep
do
your
something else, I highly encourage you to listen to, you can go online or you can go on a podcast to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. In this last episode, which was done on January 7th, it talked about corporate personhood. And in the episode notes, it says, Ralph explains it all for you, the history and the consequences of the legal fiction that is corporate personhood. Then his associates, Francisco DeSantis from the Center for Study of Responsive Law, updates us on the progress of being made to institute a corporate crime database along with the lines of the street crime database in order to track repeat corporate criminal offenders. Once unleashed, a corporation doesn't conform to normal human accountabilities. It doesn't have the same level of shame or guilt. It can make a lot of mistakes and hurt a lot of people and still be credible. It's important for all our listeners to know that the corporations are not created by investors. They're created by state authority. Limited liability was the yeast that unfurled the future elaborations of corporate power. The Justice Department has every statutory authority to create corporate crime database on their own. If it completely 100% falls within the purview to monitor crime, to attempt to arrest criminals to prevent recidivism. So we are very hopeful that the Justice Department will see the light on this issue. So if you want to get further into the corporate history, I listened to it. It's an hour long, but I was amazed about his knowledge of the law and the history of the corporations and the need for us to let it be known that corporations are not people and should not have the constitutional rights of people. No, they don't. They don't
have emotions. They're not capable of compassion.
Right, and just like he wants to set up the corporate, like we get crime reports. You heard all the news and all over on the ads for the corporate for the politicians when they were running for the House. The Republicans were running all about the crime in the streets, how bad it is. But that
not once do they talk about corporate crime.
No,
and how that's creating.
And they
the
don't
crime
even
in the
track corporate crime.
Yeah.
Even though, just like they don't track corporate crime, we have another video by Robert Reich on the little secret about corporate profits. So let's hear that video.
I want to let you in on a little secret. Have you noticed that when workers get better wages, the media blames them for rising prices?
Wages are running, well above what would be consistent with 2% inflation.
But when corporations rake in record profits, there's silence. That's because corporate profits aren't tracked nearly as closely as worker wages. And the reason why comes down to power. Let me explain. Every month, we get measurements of prices, jobs, and wages. These are the three economic variables we hear repeatedly because they're released each month like clockwork. They're viewed as the core criteria for how the economy is doing and drive the national economic conversation. But what's missing from this conversation? Corporate profits. Without a regular monthly report on profits, it's been easy for much of the media and the economic establishment to conveniently ignore them, along with the power that massive corporations wield when it comes to driving up prices. Now, we do get reports on quarterly earnings from corporations, but those estimates are guesswork at best because corporations often use every accounting gimmick imaginable to hide their true value and reduce their taxes, like Apple stashing profits overseas and Google depreciating assets like crazy. If we measured corporate profits more often and more reliably, Americans might start to get the full picture about what's driving inflation to historic highs. The power of big corporations to raise their prices higher than their costs are rising. We could see profit price inflation, profits pushing up prices, and not pin the blame on so-called wage price inflation, workers getting raises, which, by the way, have actually been wage cuts when you account for rising prices. Instead, the corporate media repeat data about jobs, wages, and prices, analyzing them and framing stories around them. They're used by policymakers at the Federal Reserve and in Congress and the White House. The conversation drives a continuous cycle.
If you look at the jobs report, you actually see signs of inflation because wages are going up.
People will stop job hopping once they start fearing that they won't be able to find a new job to hop to. He needs companies to lay off their workers or even go under to cool down the labor market.
And corporations prefer it this way because their role in driving inflation isn't even considered. They're given cover to exploit very real supply chain issues while padding their profit margins. The less up-to-date and accurate information we have about their profits, the harder it is to respond with policies that will combat their pricing power. Not to mention that they cut major checks for political campaigns, so there's little incentive on behalf of many politicians to change this. The way we try to fix the economy, particularly inflation, is skewed in favor of big corporations and against regular workers because the way we measure the problem disregards the role of corporations. If we had timely and accurate information about corporate profits, rather than assuming by default that the Fed must hike interest rates to cool the economy by weakening workers' purchasing power, we would weaken corporations' pricing power through, for example, a windfall profits tax, selective price controls, and tougher antitrust enforcement. Ultimately, we must build an economy that values workers at least as much as profits. Doing this starts with measuring the right things.
Definitely true, because when you take all the factors into consideration, when they first started talking about inflation, there was absolutely no reason for it to be happening. And I said, it's greed. Greed is dominating the situation. The corporations want bigger profit margin. Well, we're coming out of the pandemic and everything else, and people, they have all these other excuses to blame it on, but it's greed.
Yes.
Basically driving it up. It's greed causing the price increase. It has nothing. You could go out and buy 1,000 of these things and it's not going to reduce whatever you want. It's not going to reduce the price because corporations want their over 100% profit margin.
I think that every major religion in the world, I think they talk about the need to limit greed. And that's the one thing with our system, our economic system, is profits.
Drive it.
That's all it is. It doesn't matter.
What's good for the business is the only thing that matters when you're in the corporate management side of things. You're not supposed to look at the whole entire picture, which is a sad comment. And so our society has gotten into the habit of not looking at the whole picture, because sooner or later that base of people that you need to buy your product are unable to buy your product, and then your poor little business goes out. That's why small businesses have such a hard time, because they can't match.
Right, and there's just an ignoring the needs
And
of the poor and just looking at corporate profits. They don't put a price like on climate change. They don't
Right.
put a price on the damage to our environment until the insurance companies have to.
Right, and
to
what
pay.
happens? The insurance company stops covering that piece.
Right, and so
Of
then
the puzzle.
the taxpayers have to pick up the risk.
Right,
And, but they
because
still
that's
collect.
what happens in Florida. They don't do flood insurance anymore, because after all the hurricanes constantly hitting,
Right.
you don't
So-
get flood
and-
insurance.
And that happens not just in that situation, it happens all over the country. Like the corporations take the power, they have subsidiaries, they take the profits, and then if the subsidiaries, all of a sudden there's something wrong, all of a sudden the subsidiary, they file bankruptcy. You
And
go to the parent company and they say, oh, that was the actions of our
That's it,
subsidiary. We have nothing to do with that. We're not responsible for that.
Right, naturally.
You know, and it's the same.
Plausible deniability for it.
Yes, right.
by having
And
these
it-
shell companies out there.
Right. It's just, they have, I think, we had that book a long time ago that we talked about where they had all these corporate, the way they could hide their profits by having their business overseas. I mean, this most recent with the cryptocurrency.
Correct, that
Right.
was yes.
Where was he, in Jamaica or something? Or
Bahamas?
Bahamas, yeah. He was in another country, so,
Yeah.
they were
And he
they're
wasn't in
hiding.
the U.S. Bahamas, no.
He would, they're hiding their profits, and there's people in the United States or corporations in the United States that are doing that to hide.
To hide their money, and just about every multi-billionaire does it.
So they're making profits, but they're not paying
Taxes on the
taxes.
profit.
But
And that's why
they
the
caught,
windfall.
in the rise of, that's why the windfall profits tax.
Is such a scary thing to them. They don't.
Right. I think in the 1970s, I think Jimmy Carter instituted a windfall profits
He
tax
did?
against the oil companies.
He did, but now you need it against every company.
Yeah.
Not the ones based in this country, but probably are the
Right.
ones who are doing business in the country
Right.
from overseas.
Well, even like the baby formula,
Mm-hmm.
there's not enough companies making baby formula. And
Right, so hence we have a shortage.
Yeah, and they're also not following the proper safety guidelines that cause the problem. And,
Mm-hmm. Well, gee, there's nobody supervising
well,
anymore.
the other thing is we could push people to breastfeed, but these corporations, what they do is the first thing they do is they send to anybody that's pregnant, they send them Enfamil or they send them their free samples. So the mother's milk dries up, and then all of a sudden they got
They gotta buy
pay.
it.
They got to buy it.
Right. Saying this
so
is so
that-
much easier on your body.
Right.
You know,
And
whatever.
the same thing with like eggs. If you notice, the price of eggs has gone up. Well,
It has.
people, should start raising their own or buy locally and
Mm-hmm.
raise your own chickens. And same thing with cereal, breakfast cereals. There's only a few companies, and they keep jacking the price up.
They
we have
do.
to change our habits and use our dollars wisely. I think that's something Rachel would say.
Yeah, that would be Rachel, the power of the purse.
Yeah.
Rachel Branch was famous for that your dollars is another way of voting. If you can't afford to buy something, that sends a message.
Yeah, they use all their instruments to make us consumers. They use our work life and our free time to sell us things, and we have
Yes,
to
they do.
we have to raise our intellect and be able
Oh,
to
yeah.
see through,
All of that. I get every app that I download, I get an ad every day saying, here's this deal, here's this deal, here's this deal. And I basically just ignore them all because, hey, I don't want a sub tonight. I don't want to have buy one, get one free foot-long sub. Might be a nice deal, but I only want it once in a while. I don't want it every day, and I get it every day.
Yeah.
I see it
Well,
every week.
Well, we covered a lot about the corporation and unions and
And corporate profits and how
yeah.
to fight them
and
and stuff.
Robert Reich ended his first video on the word solidarity. So
We're going to go with solidarity,
Yeah.
power of the people, and we'll see you next week.
happy and healthy 2023.